This video was sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Monday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Before we get into today's MTG Top 10, I do want to draw attention to this awesome Pride shirt that Wizards of the Coast sent me. It's June, and that means it's Pride Month. You can buy this shirt from the MTG Pro Shop, and if you do, all profits go to an organization called Lambert House, an organization that helps LGBTQIA youth. So, you get a cool shirt, and you get to help out an important cause. In the description, you'll find a link to the shirt in the MTG Pro store, and you'll also find a link to Lambert House's website if you want to learn more. Alright, let's get into today's topic. One of my goals with this series is to do a video on every keyword ability and mechanic. At least, I want to do all the ones that have enough cards to be worth doing. And today, we're taking a look at the buyback mechanic. This mechanic allows you to pay an additional cost when you cast a card, and if you do, you return it to your hand after the spell resolves. The buyback costs are often quite high, but obviously, once you have the mana to cast a card and pay its buyback cost, you can just cast that spell every turn for the rest of the game if you want to. Buyback made its debut in 1997's Tempest, appearing in all three sets of Tempest block, and it made returns in 2006 to 2007's Time Spiral block and 2019's Modern Horizons. In all, there are 41 cards with Buyback, and in this video we'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. At number 10, it is Evangelize, a white mind control effect with buyback. White normally doesn't get this type of effect, but it kind of works here because of the religious flavor of the card and because your opponent chooses which of their creatures they have to give up. Obviously, if you can pay the massive buyback cost here, you'll be able to steal a creature every turn, which would be pretty sweet. Even just casting Evangelize once is particularly useful against decks that only have a single creature in play on a regular basis, especially because if a deck is like that, that single creature is usually super powerful. It was played in Tron decks in Standard, where the Tron lands made it a heck of a lot easier to actually cast Evangelize and pay its buyback. At number 9, it is Whispers of the Muse. For 1 mana, Whispers can draw you a card, but if you're able to pay the buyback cost here, you of course get Whispers back, which sort of makes it into a 6 mana card that draws you 2 cards. Obviously, the buyback here is expensive, but the baseline is a card that just replaces itself, so having that late game buyback upside is quite nice. It has 2 Pro Tour top 8s in Standard, 7 years apart from one another. The first one came in 1999 in a mono-blue control deck that ran Masticore as its primary win condition. Whispers was particularly nice to continue to feed fuel to the Masticore in the later part of the game, and in the early game it would help you find your counterspells and stuff like that. Its second Standard top 8 came in 2006 as a result of a time-shifted reprint, and that time it was played in a Tron deck, just like Evangelize. At number 8, it is Constant Mists, a fog effect with buyback. It has the same score as Whispers of the Muse, but I gave it the tiebreaker because it has a higher average finish. Fogs can be pretty frustrating to play against if you're a deck looking to do combat damage, so dealing with a fog that just keeps coming back is not a whole lot of fun for those decks. What's more is you don't even have to pay mana to buy it back, though you do have to sacrifice a land. Still, that means it's easy to cast Mist and buy it back. It was played in the sideboard of mono-green Stompy decks in the Standard of 1999, where it was particularly good in the mirror since the deck ran Overrun. At number 7, I have Flowstone Flood. It has the same score as Constant Mists and Whispers of the Muse, but it has the highest average finish of the 3, so I gave it the highest spot on this list. A fog with buyback can be frustrating to play against, but so can a land destruction spell with buyback. Like Constant Mists, Flowstone Flood also doesn't need mana to be bought back, though discarding a random card and paying 3 life is a pretty real cost. Still, being able to cast this and blow up an opposing land every turn is a pretty good way to disrupt your opponent, especially if they're reliant on powerful lands. Flowstone Flood gained all 4 of its points at the 1999 World Championships deck, where it was played in a mono-red land destruction deck. At number 6, it is Worthy Cause, a life gain spell with buyback. It's pretty easy to cast even with buyback, since it costs 1 and its buyback only costs 2, and that means if you can take advantage of this effect one way or another, it can be a pretty nice engine. Worthy Cause was used in a powerful infinite life gain combo deck in Extended. The game plan was to make a creature you have in play have an enormous amount of toughness, and then you sacrifice it to Worthy Cause. Once your life was high enough, you would then win the game with Test of Endurance. The deck could do this with Daru's Spiritualist and one of the Encore creatures, which you could use as many times as you wanted to target the Spiritualist, so its toughness would go up as high as you felt like making it. To be fair, the fact Worthy Cause had Buyback wasn't a huge deal in this deck, as just casting it once was enough, but it did have a bit of extra flexibility, like if you really needed to gain some life before you could assemble your combo. At number 5, it is Corpse Dance, a reanimation spell with Buyback. It can only reanimate the creature for a turn, and it's also rather particular. You can only reanimate the top card of your graveyard, but paying 5 mana to do that every single turn can be pretty potent if you have a well-stocked graveyard. You do have to be doing a good job of loading the graveyard, because the creature it reanimates will get exiled. In Block, it was played in a Living Death deck as an alternate way to reanimate stuff. The deck was filled with creatures who only needed to enter and attack once for some nice value thanks to Enter the Battlefield abilities or sacrifice effects. Creatures like Bottle Gnomes and Dothy Mindripper sacrificed themselves, so you also didn't need to worry about it being exiled by Corpse Dance. And that was nice, since you didn't want to make your Living Death weaker later in the game. It was played in mono-black mid-range decks in Standard 2, which ran some similar toolboxy creatures, like Phyrexian Plaguelord. It was also played as a sideboard card in extended Psychotog decks. These were control decks which sought to quickly load the graveyard to make Psychotog attack for lethal. A single Corpse Dance was played in the deck's sideboard, where it could be Cunning Wished in the event you had enough cards in your hand and graveyard to do lethal, but no Psychotog. It also didn't hurt that with Psychotog around, you have a lot of control over what the top card of your graveyard is. At number 4, it's Capsize, which I feel like is probably the most famous Buyback spell, largely as a result of being very widely played in EDH. Capsize is a nice bounce spell, since it can hit any permanent, including lands, so the fact that it comes with Buyback can make it especially obnoxious. It only found some modest success in Block and Standard, but it was quite successful in Extended, where it was played in a variety of control decks. It was especially nice in decks that had a way to make it easier to cast this, like Tolarian Academy and Sapphire Medallion. If you had those, it was a heck of a lot easier to buy the spell back. It also found its way into some versions of extended Psychotog decks. At number 3, it is Forbid, which is basically cancel with Buyback. Like some of the other cards we've seen on this list, this doesn't actually have a mana cost associated with its Buyback, though discarding 2 cards is quite the hefty price. Still, being able to counter something and hold on to your counter spell can feel pretty great, and that's what this can allow for. It has been particularly successful in decks that can make use of cards from the graveyard, and or in decks that draw so many extra cards that paying the Buyback isn't a big deal. It didn't find any success at all in Block or Standard, but in Extended, it was played a fair bit between 1999 and 2004, where it was featured in Control decks and Oath of Druids combo decks. It also has a single Legacy top 8, coming in a Life from the Loam deck, where one could discard Loam and lands to buy it back without paying any real cost. At number 2, it's Spellburst, because one counterspell with Buyback wasn't enough. So they decided to print a new one in Time Spiral. Spellburst was played in a lot of block-constructed control decks, in particular in Mystical Teachings control decks, which were capable of searching up the burst at an ideal time and potentially setting up a soft lock with it if the opponent was in top deck mode. It was also played in standard Tron decks, which, as I mentioned earlier, had quite an easy time casting cards with Buyback thanks to those powerful lands. And at number 1, it is Shattering Pulse, an artifact destruction spell with Buyback. If you're up against someone with lots of artifacts, casting this every turn is a pretty good way to win the game. The standard metagame of 1998 and 1999 was loaded up with powerful artifacts as a result of Urza's block, and as a result, Shattering Pulse was pretty close to a sideboard staple for red decks. It was also featured some in the Extended of 2003, another artifact-heavy metagame as a result of Mirrodin block. Well, those are the 10 cards with Buyback that have had the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to buy back any of these cards, I have you covered. In the description, you can find a direct link to the Card Kingdom store for each card that made it in this list. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you're looking for more Top 10s, including more on specific mechanics, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you like hearing me talk about Magic, you might like listening to me talk about history too, and that's something I do on my other channel, Need to Hone History. Thanks for watching.